Hey there, this is Jefferson. I wanted to catch up with everyone who is watching this video about the project that I've been working on. It's called Risk Runners. This project is uh, a project of sort of risk management and looking through the lens of financial mathematics and probability, with ultimately the objective of being very proficient in being able to look at uh, opportunities, but more specifically, recognize categories of opportunities and quickly be able to calculate um, sort of the expected value that you know is being proposed. Like if people are proposing that they can deliver results in the future, when I'm talking with them and when I'm recognizing that we're cooperating and looking for a common place where we can work together. Being able to actually document and calculate what you know sort of look at those future cash flows or look at that future value that's being proposed and be able to discount it till now and then ideally come up with equity structures and operating agreements, um, so that we can work together. Some of this is more colloquial and not as you know has to be so you know eagerly articulated or documented. That's why I'm looking into slicing pie and some of the different approaches at you know uh, transacting with cash or transacting with equity in joint ventures. And I get to practice every week with our Alpha Cash Flow team, um, negotiating hypothetical assets, and then but some of this is I've taken onto my own in my own projects, and I share these things on LinkedIn, but I oftentimes don't get much feedback. Um, you know, so let me show you some of what I share on excuse me online, and let me dive into a couple cool models that are available. And ideally, what you pull from this is some unique ways of thinking and utilizing AI, some unique prompts, if you will, and ways of really leveraging these tools that are available to us, um, you know, at a fairly low cost, to really sort through what you have been working on in your mind and what you need closure on and what you want to metabolize. So I'm going to share my screen. This is the preamble, and I'm sort of going off the cuff on this, so we'll see where this goes. So can you see my screen? Okay, sounds good. My central site is riskrunners.com. And on this site, I'm going to add this video after we're done here, um, as long as I don't make too big of a faux pas. And what we see here, on your phone, you would probably see this starting over here, is, my central links, and then um, the books that I wrote on AI and insurance as governance. I've started writing those 10 years ago. In Sur Vitality of the Synapse, I talk about the difference between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence in the very first chapter. And that was going on 11 to 12 years ago that I started writing about that. So I've been on the scene for a while, and it really evolved into um, applications in insurance and how our governance structures are being distributed amongst insurance. And I really broadly define insurance as that which brings assurance. So this geopolitical game is a newer game that was a long time objective of mine. Um, and, just to run through it as an example, like this is a news that happened between two players, player one, player two, in the geopolitical sphere. And you have these bars of influence, economy, military stability, reputation. So interbank lending seizes up after a major institution defaults on obligations. Both players, -7 economy, -3 stability. So what is the response that we make? Well, what I wanted to show you here is the cooperative statecraft moves. Yield, consult, endorse, promise, grant, reward, agree, cooperate. And, if you look here, it tells you the impact to your economy, your influence, your reputation. The goal of this game is to get the most influence, but how you play it really makes a difference on both you and your opponent and the global tension that happens. And then the other moves, confrontation, which is reject, accuse, demand, warn, threaten, sanction, expel, seize, use force. And strategic, propose, demonstrate, vote, elect, negotiate, instigate. So just as an example, I'm going to cooperate, execute, move, and then I get this ledger of like the AI opponent demanded. That was their move, right? And it changed our bars. So then a new event happens, right? Never let a crisis go to waste. New trade agreement and shipping routes drive a surge in global commerce. So let's say I want to do tit for tat because, they did a confrontational move. So I might warn or something like that. And then, it looks like the opponent then did a strategic move. So it looks like we're off to the races. Anyway, the idea is that this is in international relationships. These statecraft moves. I really derived these from a project. I got the wrong one. The GDELT project. As you can see in this like world map, these are all the events that are happening. Number of violent attacks, number of protests across a year or whatever time frame. Like these are going on all the time across the world. And I was absolutely fascinated by the data model that comes from this. And I started classifying the news in event codes. This underlying idea that there's no new news. It just gets fit into a finite set of event codes based on the criteria of the people publishing the news. So anyway, that this game, this statecraft game, was a goal of mine a long time ago, and I finally came back around to it by clearly articulating this intention and having AI, build the code base, and I can build from there. Let's move on to the next one: practical math screenplays. Well, I like risk analysis. And one of the core standards for risk analysis is called ISO 31010. Well, there's ISO 31000, which is the overarching, risk management ISO standard. These are international standards. And then there's one that's more specific that gives you the real, in reality, methods of risk management, and it's called ISO 31010. And then, so basically, here are the models, right? Bow tie analysis, decision tree analysis, Monte Carlo simulation. And what I did was I basically took that standard and I generated street scenarios that make it very practical. And these are just a bunch of screenplays that make it really easy to remember like how this is implemented practically. So it's supposed to be kind of a lesson plan, or you can act them out or whatever. And they got these images that are a little bit cut off, but they kind of show like this is a decision tree, and does he dodge? Does he pay now? If so, what's the probability of the outcome? And tracing it back, the images help a little bit. A Monte Carlo for a mechanic, right? He's looking at all the possible scenarios of weather and driving habits. And this is how we think. Our mind does this automatically. But being able to articulate it and also document it and show others for reproducibility is really the name of the game. Let's go through one more. Game theory, the roommate's dilemma. So, you know, it's the prisoner's dilemma of like, they both had a dog in their apartment and they weren't supposed to. So, this guy's explaining to the other one, like, okay, either we stay or we snitch, or we stay quiet, or what do we do? And they're trying to pit us against each other. So kind of real world scenarios. The other one is called Street Fighting Math Series, and this is actually formally it's a book called Street Fighting Mathematics. These are more generic mathematical methods, but definitely like when I mean generic, I don't mean simpler. I mean they apply to more scenarios. They're actually more general, almost like you know Einstein's special relativity and general relativity. His general relativity is kind of trying to explain more. So the math is actually more complex to be able to then explain more, basically. So anyway, so these ones are the pool sharks limit. Like these ones, if you can actually master the ability to do these ones, the street fighting math series, like you are on point to be able to quickly and practically calculate, with useful mathematics. So anyway, that's street math. Now these two are captive insurance models. I don't want to go into too much detail on this. If you're interested in what captive insurance is, first of all, go ahead and look it up. Let's see if I have an executive summary. So the application of this is prefabricated homes. And there's some videos and some podcasts you can listen to understand what this model is. But in general, a captive insurance is instead of your insurance premium going to an insurance company and being gone, you can capture some of that premium, basically the risk. You can capture that risk yourself and self-insure. It's basically self-insurance where if you don't make claims, you and the people in your captive, if you're not making claims, then you can profit from that premium money. And Uncle Sam is very cool with people modeling new insurance policies and new risk matrices. And you can, it's a tax incentive, but also, you know, uh, you can also have custom insurance to take on more custom risk, right? Like being able to take on, parallel projects that you normally wouldn't take on, or incentivizing your, you know, people, your management team to go and find new contracts and take on new risk. Or in dental, maybe you might be encouraged. I've talked to a dentist about this, and they were kind of saying, not necessarily this is true, but you might want to take on new technologies, or expand out to a new, like in dentistry, right? You know, children's dentistry is different than elderly dentistry. the chief actuary stated that the highest hidden cost of aging is dental care, like the unexpected cost. And you might want to take on a horizontal growth as a dentist from, children's dentistry to maybe elderly. That's like a risk that you don't necessarily have a market that knows about you providing that service and all that sort of thing. And this initial one is to try to incentivize like basically the unique risks of prefab home installation, um, like your a guest house that you might want to build. And I've talked to a lot of people who have said that how much they thought the expected cost of their prefab of their guest house was a lot less than what it ended up actually costing. So I was trying to come up with a model to basically incentivize prefab, which is basically manufactured homes. I don't know. It's along the lines of addressing the housing crisis with like an insurance model and everything. And the dental, I was basically got some market feedback that somebody was interested in this model for applied to dentistry. Okay, I'm going to move on. The account growth simulator is a tool that I wrote. It's on account.ninja. I thought it was a great website, that domain that I bought. But imagine like I had 3 projects that I was working on, like Risk Runners. The goal amount that I want to donate is, let's say, $100,000, or let's say $10,000. The threes in weight is like, does it make sense? Does it make logical sense? Let's call that a 1, because actuarial science and all that is useful. Does it make financial sense? Well, maybe you call that a point 0.5. And does it feel right? Yes, that's a 1. So I'd call that a 2.5. And the days remaining, well, I want to do this within 5 years. So that is 1,800 days. So I'm going to add that account. Maybe a second account would be a camper, buying a camper. The goal amount is $15,000. The weight, does it make logical sense? Well, it does, because getting out in nature is a 1. Does it make financial sense? Well, it does compared to getting a home. And if I can pull it behind my camper, okay, yeah, that's 1. Does it feel right? Yeah, it does. So I'm going to give that a 3. Days remaining, well, I'm shooting for maybe August 2028. So that's call that 2 years. Um, so that's 720 days. And then the next goal, I don't know. How about like something like a trip to Alaska or something. Let's just say that. Goal amount, I don't know, probably end up costing like, I don't know, $10,000. The weight, does it make sense? I mean, does it really make sense to go to, not really, so like let's call that a point 0.4. Does it make financial sense? Not really. Let's call it a point 0.7. And does it feel right? Yeah, it feels really good it could at the time. So I'm gonna call it so that's a 2.1. So days remaining, let's say my goal is to have this done in 3 years. So that's 1080. Okay, the idea here is that now I say, well, how much can I set aside each month towards these goals? Okay, and so I'm going to say I want to, each month I can set aside. Wait a second, what is this? 130. Um, I don't know I forget what this number is. Oh, I should have more labeling on this for sure. But let's say that one cycle is 30 days. Oh, yeah, you can specify how many days it is. So let's say I want to save for 12 months. That's 30 days a cycle, and the amount I can save is $1,500. If I run the simulation, yeah, simulation complete, distributed 18,000 over 12 cycles. I lost it. Um, So basically, with these metrics, right, that I can change, I can change the threes and weight, I can change the number of days left, and currently how much is allocated. But the point is that it actually allocates differently over time in a partial differential equation between each other, between these accounts. It's been a long time goal to be able to know how much I should allocate per account and at what time I should, given a fixed amount that I can allocate. So I can allocate 1,500, for 30 days. Um, so yeah, day 30, this makes sense, right? The total is 1,500 the first day. The second 30 days, the total is 3,000. The third is 90, 4,500, etc. And growth by days remaining, right? The camper clearly, based on how much it costs and how many days left I have, right? I have the least amount of days left, and it was weighted really highly as being important. So my growth by days remaining, I'm very close, right? In 1 year, I'm very close to this, and I have basically 2,700 allocated towards that Alaska trip, and towards donating to risk runners, I have 5,400, right? And here's like the slice of the pie. And then, but let's say in 1 year, yeah, I mean, I can adjust this. Maybe in 1 year, like risk runners becomes less important to me just because I'm not getting much market feedback. Not many people are that interested in it or whatever. Um, so I can change that and say, let's run this for 1 more year, right? At that point, uh, you know, I still allocated to risk runners. I'm done with the camper. I basically reached my goal. The trip to Alaska basically just jumped up a lot more than risk runners, even though there's not as many days left, and I got plenty of time with that. So that's how it kind of changed on the allocation side of things. So yeah, the account is supposed to be a generic concept, right? And the amount, in my perspective, we don't just have cash or material capital like assets, liabilities, and equity. We also have scope capital and social capital, and I have these accounts basically. So you could you know basically generate accounts of any type, and then finally you can like export the timeline and visualize it on in any of your tools, or export the current state like this, and export the timeline, and basically import the state back into it, so you can start over with other accounts, so you can keep track of all your accounts and stuff like that. So anyway, this was also a goal that I had, was to like be able to solve this kind of thing, and it's an amateur financial account growth simulator. So that's that tool. Um, Now I'm going to skip actuarial code for now, and I will get back into that um, in a moment because I want to show it locally. But this was a long time goal: public company risk factors on pureplay.riskrunners.com, which let me show you in reality how this works. I'm hoping that my tool will work right now. So let's see if this is working. I was interested in aerial firefighting companies the other day. Okay. So, because basically, I have some new relationships with people who have access to a nonprofit's. Sorry, access is a hard word. We're being asked to represent this, API that has emergency response fire data. Um, this is called NERIS, and that's how I pronounce it. Incident reporting for fire and emergency services. And I've been really, really racking my mind of like how people could utilize basically incident response data, like fire incident response data. Um, and it kind of led me down this rabbit hole of like, well, are there any companies that are you know, firefighting, right? So then in my procure crawl tool, um, I found a procurement contract for right here, Ponderosa Aviation won a contract for 148,000 from the Department of Interior for aerial firefighting for EU air attack operations valued at 745,000. Oh, it's actually 745,000 with 3-year term offering significant revenue stability for specialized aviation services. So I, was basically very interested in this, and especially because it's related to this API. So I went here to the business report, and what this tool does is it finds the public company pure play. It didn't find it, so let's try this. Arial might have been too specific. Basically, I'm trying to look for a company that a public company that provides products or services related to firefighting. And what this does is it looks for the annual reports that are required by the SEC to be published by these public companies, and it extracts out the risk factors from those public companies, and then it basically provides you a report of those risk factors. So let's let that run. If it's not running, I can find probably a sample report. I can find it right here. So okay, well, bear with me for a second. So this is, for instance, for a property, right? We have the other form of this is the property risk report. So like wildfire exposure, soil conditions, location intelligence, a growing area, property details, development and ADU eligibility, um, investment analysis. So we're doing this with properties, and then ideally this business report works. It's not working. Let's see if a different one that I think actually works. Um, the example I gave last time was car wash. Um, so maybe there's no public companies that directly provide firefighting, or this tool is broken right now. So I really don't mean to have dead air, and I will have to get working on this. Let's try it from here. If this works, it looks like that previous panel is not hooked up to our internal API. Um, do 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 dum 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 da da dum dum da 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 dum dum da 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 dum da. Do 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 ba bum 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 bum. Okay. It didn't work. Okay, whatever. So yeah, I mean I have some saved somewhere. We're gonna get that working again. But to give you the initial concept behind this is that we went and got the publicly traded companies annual reports, and for instance, as we were showing earlier in the statecraft game, like here's some of the, for instance, event codes or international event codes or statecraft that might happen that would affect that company. So a soliciting report or support, a yield to order, a warn, a sports contest. Hey, we just had a World Cup, right? So let's look at this one. Like, why do sports contests affect these companies? Well, there's something in the risk factors um, that indicate that there would be an effect from a sports contest. Now, why? I don't know. And maybe some of the language that it's actually using to create these risk profiles um, is not super precise. This was before I didn't integrate machine learning in the way that it could be implemented nowadays. But the idea is still there, right? So we have this like mind map for kind of visual thinkers. Um, you can kind of sort out the the chain of events, and right here, like restaurants adversely affected by factors such as traffic and demographics, illness attributed to food service industry, widespread negative publicity, operations. Grow primarily additional restaurants through new franchises. Um, Dependence on frequent deliveries, subject to food service businesses such as ours. Interruptions by adverse weather conditions could adversely affect availability, quality, and ingredients. Right? So these event codes, I kind of took that same logic and kind of used the same idea of tokens being like, you know, like these ones that I just read. Development, reduce such risk, cannot assure future development will be in accordance with expectations. So this is Jack in the Box. Um, but as the industries, right, restaurants, asset management, construction, they say McDonald's is a real estate company first, and then et cetera, farm machinery and heavy trucks, environmental services. So all these public companies have these risk profiles that have common industries, exposures, and event codes. And then we have sort of the wiki associations, right? McDonald's is associated, world's 50 best restaurants. These are like in reality facts that are in the Wikipedia. Not to say that Wikipedia directly is able to articulate the facts in a precise way, right? But at least these are in reality concepts, right? And it's finding the, you know, associations. And then, yeah, the actual risk factors from those publicly traded companies with these sort of tokens extracted with my semantic algebra tool. Just to give you a little bit more of how I ran this was with LinguaLint, lingualint.com. This was the little lightweight LLM that I wrote starting 10 years ago. So let me zoom back out of this rabbit hole and actually, move back to now. I guess I don't even have integral mass on here. I probably should. Because I wanted to show one last thing on integral mass in the procure crawl tool. I showed you some of these opportunities for procurement contracts. Those are helpful. We also have commercial properties, right? All these commercial properties that are, that can be found. Well, this is the county assessor, so that was, I think, commercial, residential, land, businesses for sale, right? 200 plus car rental company, 50 plus year beauty, skincare. These are all businesses for sale. Foreclosures, tax liens, residential, right? So anyway, that's like kind of the source of a lot of the data for running the risks on actual assets. Let me go into one of my oldest kind of reports. This was my NLP, which is natural language processing, big data portfolio that I use to basically land work with an insurance company. The Nautilus Insurance was really because of this side project that I had done. Which really was what my very beginnings, which primarily consisted of writing phone apps and writing news, news pipelines, from the news wires, collecting 1,500 articles a day, starting 10 years ago, and building apps and being the paper boy, right? Going to the boardwalk, and in 3 days I got 50 emails and provided a news service. I was trying to get feedback from people by having them basically choose or select the articles that they were most interested in with this feedback tool in different ways, and on a web app, on a phone app, and then extracting out the semantics and writing an event code notification system and classifying the risk with ISO 31000. Just as an example, right? So there's those event codes that we're talking about. If you look right here, natural disaster, right? Personal body damage, personal psychological damage, credit deterioration, manufacturing setback, strategic relationship setback. These are all event codes. For the natural disaster, well, you might have, now the layers go deeper, increasing liability, harming the environment, helping the environment, and then it goes all the way down to the core language that would be found, right? So for natural disaster, we have tornado, hurricane, heat, chill, windstorm, monsoon, hot, cold. This was like the early forms that I had, implemented that were implementing basically natural language processing, which nowadays, like, I think that this was a more elegant solution. I still do. And I think it can help with reducing the energy footprint by using a semantic algebra, basically a mathematics of semantics and language, before running billions of nodes. But it's still hypothetical. I would need to prove that. And then ultimately, it was generating these risk reports, right? The subjects, the concept, the risks, the international codes, the event timestamps, the sentences, and the universals, right? This is what I would tokenize on, is these universals to meaning. Because really what is unique to the conversation is, where you really get the tokens rather than what is universal to language. That was the core logic. Rather than prime numbers, like prime, all numbers are either made up of primes or are prime numbers, versus in meaning, my logic was that basically you can tokenize on the prime semantics, and what's left over is actually useful. But what I was missing was the ability that LLMs now provide, which is basically knitting this all together using proper English grammar or whatever language, because this can apply in like 26 different languages, the same process. Um, and I remember when I created this report and I looked at it and I called it my presidential daily brief, and I'm like, man, if I'm not able to create LLMs, but I was imagining this back in 2018, like if only I could knit this together. So that's some humble beginnings, right there. And then finally, what we have is the actuarial club that I started at University of Arizona. They have their Instagram right here, and you can find the events and join that. And they're starting to prioritize building an actuarial program there. But there's actively students passing exams within this club. The Boston Computation Club is we post videos. This is a very soft we. Max von Hippel and Jacob uh, Denbao and a lot of others, like they really put a lot of energy and effort into cultivating these amazing speakers and this just amazing network of people. And I'm very humbled by Max's energy and everyone else's, and how much they are cooperating towards bringing about these videos that are on so many diverse topics. But diverse, I should say, like still oriented towards computation and towards like modelable things, yet like really riding the line between like what is basically cutting edge technology and like what is comprehensible. It's very complex stuff, but they are on point. So I love this club. Finally, I have sort of a project. Me and a bunch of buddies, we created a philosophy club and tried to maintain our motivation during COVID, and we basically cultivated. We met every 2 weeks and talked about all these topics: responsibility, morale, diplomacy, virtue signaling, false KPI, succession, social contracts, negotiation, rhetoric. And you can find the topics and a little bit of our discussion from the initial prompt, together, and the background and some of the references. So this is our humble philosophy club. And then you can find me and find my personal profile. That more recently I, call this as derivative as you will. It took me a long time to be able to write a Declaration of Interdependence, a Bill of Privileges, and a Constitution of the Mangoes, which was basically another club that was kind of the cohort that started the Epic Ideas Club. So anyway, this is Risk Runners. What I want to do is specifically I want us to go to the actuarial code here. And this code is on GitHub. This is the wiki page, right? The code is here. This is the code base, right? And this is the wiki. And, we got a lot of topics here, a lot of projects. What I want to do is, rather than going over this whole wiki, I want to show and tell. I want to show you some of the models. What we're going to do is go into models and show some of these most recent models that I've been working on in the last couple days and months, right? But we're going to do this on the local file system, which in GitHub, the way code works is you can, in a public code base, you can pull the code and then work on it locally, and then contribute to the code base if you're interested in working on this. You can pull the code and just have your LLM or your AI like run havoc on it if you want, and it won't affect the original code base. But if you come up with something really cool, then like please make a pull request, which means basically requesting to add some code to the code base. But let me zoom out and talk about the intention of this code base. When I first started it, is actually for studying for the FM and the P exam, the financial math and the probability actuarial exams. This was the humble beginnings of this whole repo, which was collecting as much, resources as I could. The exam breakdown, the formulas, the resources, sample exams, test solutions, texts. The thing that I'm really excited about is that now with AI, not only can you generate as many actuarial problems as you want, especially because actuarial science, especially these beginning exams, are pretty, black and white. Like there's one right solution for each problem, and it's very doable to not only generate as many problems as you want, which anybody who's taken the SATs knows, like that was one of the difficult parts, and how much money parents spend on getting, private tutors, um, is partly getting the exam problems, because once you do an exam problem one, a practice problem, like you know how to do it. Like it's no longer as useful. And back when I was taking the SAT, for instance, like that was part of it. I kind of ran out of resources, and I did have a tutor for a little bit, but like now, like we can generate as many practice problems as we want with LLMs, and Claude and different, you know, uh, different AIs, and then also you can then, obviously generate the solutions, but then you can also get tender care. I know it's not as tender as a tutor, like that's way better, believe me. But like if you're at the point where, you want to put in this extra 30% every day towards passing an exam like this, you're in the best possible time in history to pass exams, because you can literally ask, how did you solve this? Wait, I'm not understanding this specific point. Explain this to me. Like it is the perfect timing to be able to pass these kind of exams. So I am going to build out the actuarial tools. But for now, I've been out in the wild, wild west exploring all these different, projects and everything. I gave a presentation to the University of Arizona Risk Runners, and you can see that here. Well, I want to show you a couple models that I think are really explanatory of like what the Risk Runners website provides is sort of a way of thinking, and it's a way of approaching everything from crises. Remember when we were doing the statecraft example, right? The statecraft game, or the account simulation, or we want to be able to apply risk management to practical real world scenarios, right? So what I want to show, first of all, on a more personal level, is modeling with mathematics. For instance, um, you know, for instance, right, the life cycle of capital, right? What I call material capital, social capital, and scope capital, right? In general, my system of thinking within this is that our material capital compared to everyone else is right skewed, in that very, less people have a lot of money, have a lot of capital, material capital, and most people have less, right? Versus like social capital, most people have, are very interdependent. They have a lot of people in their lives. Now we do have this limit, the Dunbar number of how many we can really keep track of is about 150 to 250, I guess. In terms of how many people we can hold in our minds. But the point is that it's basically left skewed. And then scope capital is basically the ability to handle different scopes of understanding is normally distributed. You could call it the intelligence curve, whatever you want to call it. Like it's normally distributed. It's the green one. So what I wrap this into is this is a personal kind of diagram, but it's showing like at age 32, right? The S curves are they kind of look like this, right? My material capital, my wealth, is at its highest point of acceleration. It does have a life cycle, though, right? There is a limit. My social capital is sort of at its highest velocity, but it's not really accelerating much more. And my physical, which, I'm calling my scope capital, but in general, like, my mind, I will lose my mind in the sense of I won't have the same fluid intelligence. I might have more crystallized intelligence as I get older, but as I've, met with a lot of old people and I like to sit and listen to them, and they talk about floating in and out of their past, right? I've worked with a neurosurgeon in 11th grade. Like I've always been fascinated by kind of how the life cycle of our mind, and we shift from fluid intelligence to crystallized intelligence. So I'm sort of at the highest deceleration of my mind. And it's kind of a personal diagram, but again, this is a ways of modeling things with probability and with life cycles and curves and stuff. So um, I guess it's a little bit of vulnerability, not to be too on the nose. But let me jump to the next one. So blockade. Let's talk about an idea of self-driving cars, coordinated autonomous vehicles blockading, being an emergency scenario where they, you know, go onto every exit of a city and they stop. They just stop and it blockades the city grid. It blocks the city grid. And the idea is like the incident response, right? Like vehicles blocked, grid paralysis, exits blocked, attack trigger. What model could you use? Well, one of the models is called a Poisson or a queuing theory. And this is kind of a way of modeling this. And, the statement of procedure mitigation recommendations update autonomous vehicle protocols to reject synchronized stop commands near critical infrastructure unless multi-source validated is an example, right? Minimize, deploy decentralized community protocols to coordinate resilient neighborhood logistics via alternate routes. Detect real-time anomaly detection on fleet-wide velocity telemetry to flag coordinated deceleration patterns, right? Being able to detect these vehicles. If we're going to have the ability for autonomous vehicles, maybe there should be a parallel command within the computers that actually don't allow for coordinated stop. So, it's just one of those dreams that people have, nightmares, if you will, of like, oh no. Well, we can model it and we can talk about it, right? Let me show you another one. This is like the Strait of Hormuz, right? I simulated, maritime denial zone where it's like, this is the Strait of Hormuz. There's a sort of a target, this is a maritime vehicle that needs to be denied, and there's a response team, and the other ones have to be queued, right? The LNG carrier, the cargo carrier, the tanker have to be queued somewhere out in the ocean out here. This is the response. You got to pay your troll toll or whatever, and maybe other countries want the troll toll instead of your country. So, and this is just kind of zooming out. So it's examples of simulation that could be done. And then, same kind of idea as the vehicle coordinated block. Like this is, simulating, again, with a Poisson distribution, impact 20% of global oil transits, this checkpoint daily, full blockade equals immediate global energy supply shock. So disruption over time, simulating the queuing and the cost and all that sort of thing. So it's running the risks. Okay, let's move on. Now these are some older models that I have now been able to metabolize and work on, um, that are a long time in the making, and I'm getting closure with AI being able to generate these basically scripts, and generate, basically a visual to represent what were old ideas. This was an old idea that I had that was like, if the event is the Federal Reserve warned that escalating semiconductor sanctions against China pose systemic risk to global supply chains, Treasury Secretary noted the trade war's potential for, etc. So my tool would extract the Federal, Treasury Secretary, U.S., the blue concepts, which I don't know if you remember this, but it's like basically the, like in Wikipedia, right? The I just called them the blues. So like sanctions, risk, trade, volatility, they're basically tokens. Recessions, disruption, tariff. Interpretation, running a simulation of events that the Federal Reserve expresses to exist, the least likely outcome is peace, and the most likely outcome is war, calibrated with known sanctions. So the idea is, it was utilizing, ordered set theory, and basically giving probabilities. If you can choose an order to each of these probabilities, and then you actually anchor one of them happening, right? Sanctions. Okay, we're hearing we're going to get sanctions from Trump. Uh, Looks like the probability is really high. It can actually take all of the other probabilities in that order, right, in that decision tree, and increase the probabilities for all the ones above it, right? Because you anchored that. So it's an old idea that I had. I'd love for feedback on it. The idea is that you're anchoring, like the ripple effect, if one of them is happened and you've actually ordered them, right? The axiom of choice. What I say is it's biconditional with, the well-ordered set. And that idea is that if you actually can order them, kind of implies that there is a kind of a anchor, that would actually affect, the rest of the probabilities, and vice versa. But anyway, I call it demand side semantic scoring, quantifying geopolitical risk via ordered set theory. So a little bit abstract. Clear the palate. Smell some coffee. We just got two more. So these ones might be a little bit more emotional, but I want to finish on an emotional stance. So I'm very much into morale and the encouragement of cooperation and the encouragement of people transacting, social capital, scope capital, material capital. And now I really got help from a friend on this, and he helped introduce me to agent-based models. This is not to be confused with like agentic AI. This is called agent-based models. Let me actually show you the tool that can really help you get a grasp on this. I will actually just pull up the tool because it's a free tool on netlogo.com or .edu or something, netlogo.org. And it's got models that can do, agent-based model. It's basically little decisions that are made by the agents that, you can model. And now this has a language, right? These models. So let's go to the model library, and we can see all of these models in art and biology, chemistry, computer science, earth science, etc. So we're going to go to social science, and we're going to go, for instance, altruism. Evolutionary biology model. It models population genetics with respect to fitness of traits. Cooperation, right? This evolutionary model, the agents, cows, compete for natural resources, grass. Divide the cake. This is evolutionary game playing model. This types of agents must divide a common resources. The original model isn't cake, it's cake. But let's think of the edible grass instead. Um, so segregation, right? Little decisions, right? So you can extend these models by putting them into AI if you want, because the code is right here. It's his own language. But let's just run, for instance, this segregation model. So step by step by step, you look at little decisions, make it end up segregating just by little decisions that people make. Are these, sorry, I shouldn't say people, agents, right? They're isolating out a specific decision, a specific little rules that are made by the agents, and rather than using, one math equation that solves everything, you just use the power of a computer to simulate, you know, all the various agents making those little decisions, and then like amazing patterns come out of this, right? Let's talk about the. This is a fun one, right? The bar, right? So much is learned at the bar, right? So what this is modeling. The idea is that when you go to a bar, you want to go when it is, let's say, 65% full. Because if there's too few people, you don't want to be there, and if it's too many people, you don't want to be there. So it has a bunch of people moving, and then they have memory. They have memory of, basically the last time that it was what it was like, and the overcrowding threshold is 60%, and the number of strategies. People have different strategies of like maybe checking out the bar, checking who's in the bar, whatever, and you've got multiple different kind of strategies, and all of this, you know, basically it models over time the bar attendance from all these, agents basically. So now I don't want to be overlap. Like these are all social models. I mean, the ones that I just showed, but we've got psychology, we got philosophy, we got networks, we got mathematics, games, right? Minesweeper and Pac-Man, like, earth science, climate change, right? Let's look at that one for just one more model. Right? So we got basically um, little beams of light coming in, and you have like you can add clouds, and you're looking at the world, the global temperature, and basically adding CO2, and like what happens to the global temperature. Well, maybe if I add a bunch of clouds, we see it starts to actually taper off, right? So like you're proving that seeding clouds can like actually reduce, the temperature on the earth or whatever. So like remove clouds or remove CO2 or whatever. So um, there's like, so what I'm trying to do is not just provide like my models, but show you, like, teach you how to fish. And this tool is totally free. You can donate. I'd love to add that to my account ninja and add like, donate to NetLogo later in life and stuff like that. But I only have so many 10% that I can give away. But yeah, NetLogo, totally support this. Love it. Let me jump back to this model right here. It was a morale model. And the idea is boundaries. Are there no boundaries, which you might call a free market? Or the orange is soft boundaries, like redistribution. Like after people have money, then you redistribute it. And then active boundaries, which actually are kind of boundaries on the transactions themselves. Basically, like those who have not overly transacting, either through communication models or even your selective attention, that you might not even see, certain people, so that you're not incentivized to, predatorily transact with them or whatever. So like kind of active boundaries in our communications in our life. rather than like free market. Free is a very, tough word. It's kind of like, I don't really mean free. I mean like unbounded market. But it's basically showing the wealth distribution over time. That in a unbounded market, you know, the wealth distribution becomes right skewed, as I was showing earlier. Right, a lot of people have less, some people have more. With soft boundaries, it's showing that it is kind of more evenly distributed, but still, you know, uh, a lot of people have less, but it's just more spread out and it's more reactive. And then like with active boundaries, it is more normally distributed. And obviously, the specific boundaries are important to talk about. So I have some like narrative around this to explain like what are the boundaries. But then the average morale, right? With green, morale is highest, and the most amount of transactions are happening. With orange, morale is less, but it's pretty stable, but there's less transactions. And with the red, with the no boundaries, there's less morale, and it really tapers off on how many transactions actually happen. So this is proving out, and there's this Gini coefficient, Gini, that it is formally, something that's relevant to this, right? The Gini coefficient is 0 is equal, 1 is one agent has all kind of thing. So the Gini coefficient is better for the active boundaries that are proposed here. So anyway, let's go on to one last thing, which is a game that I've been thinking about since 2017, since I wrote a paper about how in 10 years there very well could be a change in constitution or a buying of Venezuela by another country. And I have the paper as proof that I published onto LinkedIn. Published is a soft word for sure. But yeah, the idea is like running this game theory scenario to say like so here's the idea: strategy breakdown. I'm realizing that I haven't been zooming in, so I apologize, but I hope my narrative made sense. How do I move over? Oh, here we go. Wait. How do I move over? Okay, let's just look at this. Strategy breakdown: Venezuela, refugee grantor or leverage player. Low flow means minimal refugee displacement. Flood creditor nations, mass refugee direction towards credit holders as geopolitical pressure to yield oil credit. Conditional flow refugees tied to explicit credit negotiation offers. So the idea that I've been understanding, that I wrote a paper on, was about how Venezuela in their constitution had to give 50% of 50% of spending in their constitution had to be towards social welfare. So the money was just being handed out. And the USGS determined that Venezuela had more oil than Saudi Arabia, albeit crude. Well, countries took out lines of credit, like Russia, China, US, and there was an order to the lines of credit, like liens on the natural resources, right? And US was not number one because Venezuela chose, and then the creditor countries, right? They can either reject and hold, refusing refugees keeping their line of credit, accept and yield, take refugees but lose credit, or renegotiate, partial deal on both. And then you have international organizations that mediate, compensate, or stay out, and NGOs that pressure creditors via public campaigns. So the idea was like, oh, what is the game theory? What is the Nash equilibrium of like basically refugees being exchanged for natural resources and like lines of credit? And that word exchange is like a tough word because like what were on the phones of the people. What were the apps and what was the information coming in on the phones of the upwards of 10 million people who crossed the U.S. border? How did they know what they knew through the phones that they all had? Did they have perhaps different apps on their phone? Did they have perhaps different information that was coming through their phone? Um, I think the answer is yes, it was different information, and the information specifically incentivized them to come up to America. And then I think about being an engineer, like, oh, who wrote those apps? How did the information spread, right? Like if we look at, for instance, like the model of, just as an example, like a simple viral marketing, right? Like, let me set up a viral model. So let me lay out a model of people. I'm just trying to show like how a viral an idea like these two red dots, if you have this interweb of a network, right? If you have this deep of a network, starting with one, the network type, preferential attachment, whatever, how does it spread? How does something go viral, right? In graph theory, right? In the graph theory of all the people in a network that is very easily modelable from anybody who's connected to each other by a phone and on the internet, and seeing how an influencer can spread an idea depending and how quickly the idea can be spread. Right? It's models like this that as you run the risks and you look at these agent-based models, you start to visualize and see these ideas. So anyway, I mean, if I can only contribute one game theory kind of idea, like in an international stage, like you only get really one in your lifetime, like one actual idea that like could an international court set up a new set of precedents by legitimizing the claim that hey, if the U.S. accepted a bunch of refugees from Venezuela, we should be able to have a higher line of credit or a higher lien order on the resources. Like Russia and China didn't accept refugees from Venezuela. So it's just an idea, and here's the game theory. Like what the cooperative equilibrium was, the creditors find that yielding credit positions in exchange for refugee acceptance produces higher long-term payoffs than resisting. It's actually a little bit different than what I had thought by running the game theory, is that Venezuela is incentivized to flood the creditor nations with the refugees. What is a actual cooperative equilibrium is the creditor companies actually accept the refugees and actually yield their credit. Like literally don't, they lose their line of credit or they lose their credit entirely. And then like no intervention from the international organizations, and then the NGOs are silent, right? Venezuela's flood creditor nation strategy dominates because it costs little to direct refugee flows and builds diplomatic capital regardless of creditor response. Creditors rationally hold credit positions because oil credit value is greater than reputation cost in the short to medium term. Breaking this equilibrium requires external mechanisms that change the economic calculus, like international compensation or debt restructuring. So this is, game theory. This is applying street mathematics. This is utilizing the risk runners kind of domain or website and everything. And um, let me just kind of wrap this up with a final word, if you will. Um, don't we get to have any fun? I mean, this is kind of what is at our fingertips with technology and with computers and with a mind and with time. right? And meditation, and Saturday mornings like this morning, like meditating and, dreaming up some of these scenarios and remaining a witness and paying attention. If you can't pay the bills, pay attention, right? Paying attention to what is going on, but also picking and choosing your ignorances very carefully, right? Because every time you're ignoring that State of the Union, or you're ignoring that, you know, publicized events, you're you're cultivating focus, right? So there's actually one last thing I want to talk about, right, which is kind of a concern of a lot of people. Um, Let me kind of set the stage because this is kind of heavy mathematics that I'm about to be showing, um, but it's abstract, right? So there's this book that I caught on to, which is called Princes of the Yen, written by Richard Werner. And he was respected in the central bank communities for having gone to Japan and learned and wrote about ultimately how whenever you hear the idea of a Fed rate hike, that is sort of an obfuscation, right? It's like the whole look at my hand over here and then actually moving something over here, right? So this is the um, interest rates, whereas what really moves the economy is something called credit creation. And credit being given, in other words, like if I give $1,000 to a bank, they're allowed to print $999,000. They only have to have 1% reserves, and that's just the way it is. So some people might, say 10%, right? They can print $9,000. Um, but I'm pretty certain that the reserves are only have to be 1%. But somewhere in between, like these banks, right? The banks have to listen to how the credit is going to be spent, and there's kind of two questions, right? It's like, is this money going to be spent on productive things, right? Is buying a TV productive? Does it produce cash flow? Um, does buying a PlayStation 4, is it productive? Does it produce cash flow? Versus like, you know, buying a table and buying lemonade ingredients, like that might produce cash flow if you have set up a lemonade stand. So there's a question of, is this loan going to be used for productive purposes? And then another question is, what is the likelihood this person is going to pay back their debt, right? And really what you start to learn in, this realm of credit and everything is like the idea that in the primary markets, there's no discriminating on the opportunity to access primary assets, mainly kind of the institutionalized ones like real estate, like stocks and bonds. Like people can buy them. Obviously, there are criteria sometimes, but then you start to learn that, in the secondary markets where these assets are bundled, like if you have a mortgage, which so many people don't nowadays, especially my age, like that you sometimes get a letter in the mail that says, hey, your mortgage is owned by somebody else now. That was a common thing that people got in the mail back when people had homes, right? And I'm talking about my age. And like, but when people, my dad was my age, he might get a letter in the mail that says, hey, your loan is owned by somebody else. And you just kind of file it away, right? That idea is like the secondary market is that your asset is being bundled. The asset to them. To you, it's a liability, right? That mortgage. But to them, to the banks, it's an asset that is guaranteed cash flow. And in the secondary market, any demographic goes, any distinguishing variable, right? Like on, data.gov, right? It was just government data on demographics and census data and stuff like that. Basically, if the question is asked at all, that data will be utilized to delineate and determine who will pay back their debt. So we're doing it to ourselves by asking these demographic questions, because then they are ways for the banks and also others who are leveraging credit scores to determine who will pay back their debt. And then those in the secondary market, those assets are bundled, and we are bundled with our assets, at least that are in our name, are bundled with other people with very similar demographics. So yeah, I mean, is there discrimination? I mean, or is there guilt? Is there this idea of guilty by association? You know, or uh, like are we limited in our access? Well, these are, I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with that other than it's kind of setting the stage for looking at metrics in the economy that actually um, are a better indicator of the state of the economy. And I think people, especially in the crypto world, are like concerned about, is there is the economy healthy right now? Like, is it growing? Is it healthy? If the Federal Reserve is an independent entity, and if it has the ability and the track record of performing, you know, uh, booms and busts in a non-accountable way, um, are we headed towards a boom? Are we headed towards a bust? Is the AI, in growth in the economy, is that going to lead to a bubble? Like questions like this, right? Well, I want to say first of all, there's probably more I'm just guessing. There's more accountability on the Federal Reserve than ever because of like the DEF CON community and the frickin' decoders that are out there. And I use that word very carefully. The decoders who are putting pressure on, those entities. But those entities have other agencies that very much help them. And, the Constitution says that the executive branch is, has to adhere to the president. So there are some constitutional frictions right now going on about, which entities actually can have individuals that are fired if they're not by the president, literally. And who makes decisions? Like the Congress is directly given, the power to decide how money is spent, whereas like so there's some friction going on. But anyway, this is supposed to alleviate some of that friction. This that I'm showing you right now. So let's go through this. It's based on the Werner model. Werner's credit creation being a better indicator of the economy than anything else. Bust cycle risk assessment is a 32% moderate, estimated timing 12 to 18 months if conditions worsen. So I don't want to give too much assessment, but I do want to preempt, not to precondition you or anything like that, right? There's so many ways of looking at this. I don't know what I'm talking about. Let me just start by saying that. But this looks good to me. I feel a lot better about the economy that I specifically know what to look for. And it's really the month over month comparison. It's running this next month and the month after and keeping a pulse on the credit, right? A credit pulse report that really matters because we don't know anything by a static model of what's going on. We only know it by the change, right? The change model is the only way that you can know something is by its change, right? Physics, study of change. But anyway, so what are the active signals? Well, credit impulse is negative, so there's a deceleration going underway. Credit creation is slowing. And I do want to say I did have a second pair of eyes on this from a trusted like financial advisor. So, and he said he agrees with the analysis of these data points. So, I do feel comfortable sharing this. Credit creation is slowing, leading indicator of future slowdown. Financial credit dominates at 72.7%, threshold 65. The Werner bubble indicator is that credit feeding asset prices, not production. Well, that's the way it was up to this point. Is that, and we have a visual for this, but financial credit is delineated from productive credit. Financial is like real estate and other non-productive, credit being created, like loans. And then, but here's one key point, right? Anytime somebody says like, "Oh, the stock market is the highest it's ever been," nominal GDP is at 2.5% below potential. The economy is actually underperforming, so we're in a deflationary gap. Fed easing, right? The Fed's stance, their policy is easing, and there's sort of there's some nuance here, right? There's a lot of nuance here. It's a partial differential equation, but I just want to say it's info, right? Watch if it reaches productive sectors. So bust cycle, again, here's like what's contributing to that 32 score. Really that financial credit dominance is the issue. But a stance of easing to me actually makes sense if like the financial credit is dominant. It's not majorly dominant. It is dominant though. So there's an easing. The idea is that if it's not productive loans, it can go to speculative investment. This is kind of what this means. Financial credit is like speculative investment, which can lead to bad debt, people not paying back their debt. Okay, let's go through each one of these. Credit creation trend. The Werner thesis, credit creation by banks is the primary determinant of economic activity. GDP, employment, wages, and profits all follow from the quantity and discretion of credit. The Fed's focus on interest rates and inflation misses the mechanism that actually drives the economy. So total loans and leases at commercial banks. I don't find this to be very useful, honestly, but it is like getting close to being excessive. The credit impulse, the acceleration, deceleration of credit growth. There is not just all green or all red. Like the Fed is actually making like changes and adjusting based on the next snapshot or the next view of what's going on. That looks healthy to me. But we have had two kind of pretty hefty decelerations, and then they've said that they're easing. So that's like there is some harmony in what's being said. The next one, productive versus financial credit. Credit flowing to the productive economy, which we're going to call commercial and industrial. Sorry, I'm moving around. C&I loans generates real GDP growth. Credit flowing to financial circulation, real estate and consumer debt inflates asset prices without creating proportional real economic value. This is the mechanism of a bubble creation. So C&I loans are actually, a growth. There is actually a growth in C&I loans. Consumer loans are pretty steady, and real estate loans are pretty steady, right? Like, although it does make me think about, like, I myself not being in a good position to buy a home in general is, like, kind of true across a lot of people, right? Here's kind of a concerning one, is that the financial, real estate, and consumer percentage of the share of the total credit is basically, what was it again, 72%. Basically, productive loans should be a minimum of 35%, and they're not. So that's what it was for the last 12 months. But we actually have a really good trend here in my perspective. Productive loans are accelerating. Real estate is decelerating. Consumer credit is accelerating. Well, that's not good, but it is, it's not good, but it's, less than productive. And I shouldn't say good and bad. I'm going to hold off on that because I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about. But revolving credit cards, 2.6% is decelerating. Non-revolving, like student loans, is stable. Implied window guidance. The window guidance thesis from Werner. Central banks don't just set interest rates, they informally guide commercial banks on where to allocate credit. By watching which sectors receive accelerating credit and which are being starved, we can reverse engineer the Fed's implicit policy intent. Sectors receiving credit have financing tailwinds. Sectors being starved face headwinds. This tells you where the system wants growth to happen and where entrepreneurial risk is best rewarded. So again, sectoral credit ranking. Commercial and industrial has strong tailwind. Total consumer is neutral or positive. Modest credit support. Commercial real estate, neutral and positive. Consumer credit, revolving, like retail, e-commerce, consumer services, fintech, is neutral and positive. Total real estate, neutral and positive. Consumer credit, non-revolving, like auto industry, education, durable goods, and personal services, is actually neutral and minimal credit growth. And residential real estate is neutral and minimal credit growth. Entrepreneurial positioning signals, specifically the opportunity is in commercial and industrial. This is kind of the reverse engineering the intent. Commercial and industrial credit growing at 8.2% year over year, accelerating. Banks are actively lending here. Implies Fed window guidance is favorable. Entrepreneurial ventures in manufacturing, B2B services, industrial expansion, equipment-heavy businesses have financing tailwinds. Implied window guidance assessment, the Fed appears to be favoring productive and industrial credit over real estate. This suggests policy intent is toward real economic expansion rather than asset inflation. Best entrepreneurial positioning, B2B, manufacturing, industrial, and technology. So this is a very important personal, that I'm sharing with you, personal pulse on the credit, right? Like, the productivity paradox, in my opinion, which has been a very big point for me for the last like many years, is looking like the Fed's doing something about it. They are actually trying to incentivize like productivity, because I don't know why, but I like it. So yeah, top performers, right? You can look at these for a second, right? In industrial, right? And then the worst performers. Manufacturing, right? Best performers, worst performers. Technology, best performers, worst performers. Consumer facing, best performers, worst performers. Defense and aerospace, best performers, worst performers. Now, I want to talk about, like, from my own pulse on things, because I see the contracts. Axon has a lot of contracts, government contracts. Like, I don't know, just because they've been a worse performer doesn't mean they're not potentially doing okay, right? They can change. Intuit, I just got a call the other day that they were looking at all of my data in my fucking QuickBooks, right? So then they told me that I qualified for a loan. Well, I guess there is decentralized, credit creation, and it's being allowed from the people who have a pulse on our QuickBooks. Kind of baffles me, but maybe they do have the best indicators of who will make productive investments, and you can turn off them sharing with them from the privacy and from the privacy settings. So I encourage that, but they also have a snapshot. So I kind of feel raped in this situation. Credit creation versus nominal GDP. Werner argues the Fed should target nominal GDP growth, 5% for the U.S., rather than price stability alone. Nominal GDP determines overall sales, profits wages and salaries, its gap to potential growth determines prices. So the rest of this is pretty complex. Basically, like the credit to GDP gap, positive is a buttable risk, negative is a contraction risk. We are actually approaching, like, compared to the GDP, a bubble risk. Um, in that the gap is getting bigger from the actual GDP, and this is proof of, you know, the basically the productivity paradox. And it might seem like we're more productive, but with advents that are going on, um, might be just a lot of moving around data, stuff like that. But we got this. We got this team. Yeah, dollar strength and imports. Fed policy versus credit growth, like the Fed funds rate and whatever. Fed's policy is easing. The Fed funds rate is whatever. The yield and stuff like that. The actual correlations between credit and other things, and showing how, credit is a better correlation with other things. And then total credit versus nominal GDP is a really, really strong correlation. C&I loans versus employment, really strong correlation. Although it's a negative correlation, there's a strong correlation between dollar index and imports, and et cetera. So, uh, bank credit versus GDP. So anyway, the monthly, I'm going to keep a pulse on this, the monthly sensitivity board, things to watch out for, et cetera. So direction is growth, confidence moderate. Key drivers, total credit creation is at 6.6% year over year, decelerating, right? They're easing the economy so it doesn't bubble. Productive credit share, 27.3%, concerning. Fed policies easing, right? Are they actually doing it? Well, it actually looks like, from my high level evaluation, we are actually approaching a bubble, and the Fed and other banks are leaning towards, let's keep funding productive loans and get this percentage up, but we're going to ease credit towards non-productive loans like real estate and consumer credit. But then I get this weird phone call from Intuit that they're willing to give me a line of credit. So, like, I don't know if I'm taking it personal, Intuit, but I love you guys anyway. So anyway, it's a parasocial relationship. Okay, well, that's enough for me. It's kind of, me sharing with you where my mind's at, what, the projects that I'm working on. I really appreciate you putting up with this video. I'm going to put this into Opus Clip to generate shorter videos, just to kind of try to, make the content more in bite-sized pieces and digestible. That's kind of why I went through the whole thing. But I did want to make the entire video to kind of give a snapshot of where my studies are, and to promote riskrunners.com, and sort of, I could call it my nonprofit, I could call it my legacy, in the sense of, like, the University of Arizona actuarial program is now being prioritized after me starting that club, and after there's about 15 students that have passed exams now, and I'm trying to network them into the, Arizona Captive Insurance Association and the Casualty Actuaries of the Desert States, and ideally employers. And I've provided a framework for how ASU built an actuarial program and how they've structured it to try to promote a similar structure, in the relationships between the different entities that make the ASU program so successful. So that's like Risk Runners. I've kept the domain, right, and I kept the name. Obviously, they might decide one day to shift the name of that club, but long story short is this is sort of my nonprofit work, and I'm really trying to collect resources and build sort of a team of people who understand sort of the significance of this approach at getting to know both macro and micro economics. So thank you for your time. Have a blessed day and week. And, um, you know, uh, basically really appreciate the people in my life and the network who puts up with me being this way. And I appreciate God's gifts and really the co-creation. These co-creations come from love. So thank you so much.